Woman wins a curse instead of a prize on TV show. What happens next surprises even the producers. When Sarah Thompson steps onto the glittering stage of Lucky Break, America's hottest new game show, she has no idea that her life is about to change forever. But as the cameras roll and millions tune in, Sarah's dream of fame and fortune takes a nightmarish turn. What follows is a roller coaster of impossible choices, shocking revelations, and a race against time that will leave you questioning the very nature of luck, fate, and the power of the human spirit. Sarah Thompson's fingers trembled as she smoothed down her newly purchased blouse, her heart pounding in her chest like a jackhammer. The dazzling lights of the Lucky Break stage threatened to blind her, and the excited murmur of the studio audience seemed to grow louder with each passing second. At 32, Sarah never imagined she'd find herself here, a contestant on America's most talked about new game show, with a chance to win a life-changing sum of money. "You've got this, Sarah?" she whispered to herself, remembering the mountain of bills piling up on her kitchen table back home in Millbrook, Alabama. The weight of her widowed mother's medical expenses and her own struggling art supply store pressed down on her shoulders, making the gaudy sequins of her jacket feel like chainmail. As the floor manager counted down to showtime, Sarah's mind drifted to the whirlwind of events that had led her here. It had started with a random online ad, a desperate late-night application, and then a series of auditions that had felt more like interrogations. Now, standing under the scorching studio lights, it all seemed like a surreal dream. "Live in 5, 4, 3. The floor manager's voice snapped Sarah back to reality. She plastered on her best smile, trying to channel the confidence she'd seen in countless contestants before her. The show's theme music blared through the studio, and the charismatic host, Chuck Walters, bounded onto the stage. His teeth gleamed impossibly white as he flashed his trademark grin at the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Lucky Break, the show where ordinary folks like you and me get a shot at extraordinary fortune." Chuck's voice boomed through the studio, eliciting cheers from the audience. "Tonight, we have a very special episode for you. Our contestant isn't just playing for cash. Oh no, tonight's lucky winner will receive a prize beyond their wildest dreams." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. This was news to her. The producers had mentioned the possibility of bonus prizes, but nothing concrete. A flutter of excitement mingled with her nervousness. Chuck turned to her, his eyes twinkling with practiced charm. "Sarah Thompson, come on down." On wobbly legs, Sarah made her way to center stage. Chuck took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sarah, tell us a little about yourself," Chuck prompted, his voice honey smooth. Sarah swallowed hard. "Well, I'm from Millbrook, Alabama. I run a small art supply store, and I'm here tonight hoping to win enough money to save my business and help with my mom's medical bills." A sympathetic "ah" rippled through the audience. Chuck nodded, his expression a mask of compassion. "A noble cause indeed. Well, Sarah, are you ready to take a chance that could change everything?" I think so," Sarah replied, her voice quavering slightly. Chuck's grin widened, taking on an almost predatory quality that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Then let's play Lucky Break." The audience erupted in cheers as glittering confetti rained down from above. Sarah tried to focus on Chuck's explanation of the rules, but her attention was drawn to a dark-suited man standing just off stage. His eyes, hidden behind reflective sunglasses, seemed fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. As the first round began, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far bigger and potentially far more dangerous than a simple game show. Little did she know, her wildest dreams were about to collide with her worst nightmares, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about luck, fate, and the price of a second chance. The next hour passed in a blur of flashing lights, ringing bells, and Sarah's own pounding heartbeat. Question after question, she drew upon knowledge she didn't even know she possessed. It was as if an unseen force guided her hand to the correct buttons, whispered answers in her ear. "Unbelievable, folks," Chuck exclaimed, his perfect teeth gleaming under the studio lights. Sarah Thompson has just broken our all-time points record, but the night isn't over yet. Sarah, are you ready for your final challenge? Sarah nodded, breathless with excitement. The dark-suited man she'd noticed earlier had edged closer to the stage, his presence a nagging distraction at the edge of her consciousness. Chuck's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. Behind one of these 3 doors is a prize beyond your wildest dreams. Behind the others, well, let's just say you don't want to choose those. He winked at the camera. What'll it be, Sarah? Door number 1, 2, or 3? The audience began to chant, the sound swelling like a tidal wave. Choose, choose, choose. Sarah's hand hovered over the buttons. A bead of sweat trickled down her back. For a split second, she locked eyes with the dark-suited man. He gave an almost imperceptible nod towards door number 2. Door number 2, Sarah called out, her voice cracking slightly. The studio fell silent. Chuck's smile froze on his face. Are you sure about that, Sarah? He asked, his showman's composure slipping for the first time. Yes, Sarah replied, a strange certainty settling over her. Door number 2. Chuck shrugged, his smile returning full force. Well, folks, you heard it here. Let's see what Sarah has won. With a dramatic flourish, he pushed a big red button. Door number 2 creaked open, revealing nothing, just an empty space. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Sarah's heart sank. Had she just thrown away her one chance at changing her life? Suddenly, the studio lights flickered and died. A cold wind whipped through the set, scattering papers and sending shivers down everyone's spines. When the lights came back on, the dark-suited man stood center stage. Congratulations, Sarah Thompson, he said, his voice as smooth and dark as an oil slick. You've won exactly what you asked for, a chance to change everything. Chuck stumbled backward, his face pale. Cut the cameras, he shouted. Security. But no one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen. The man removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that smoldered like coals. I am Azrael, and I represent certain interested parties. You, Sarah, have been chosen for a very special opportunity. Sarah's mouth went dry. What kind of opportunity? Azrael's lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. A curse, my dear. A most unique and powerful curse. For the next 30 days, everything you touch will turn to gold. The audience gasped collectively. Sarah's mind reeled. Like King Midas? She stammered. Precisely, Azrael nodded. Everything you touch, be it object or living being, will be transformed into solid gold. A blessing and a curse, wouldn't you agree? Sarah's head spun. But why me? Why offer this curse? Azrael's eyes glittered with amusement. Why does anyone offer a bargain? For entertainment, for profit, for the delicious complexity of human choice. You have 24 hours to decide. Accept the curse, and you'll have unimaginable wealth. But at what cost? Refuse, and you'll return to your mundane life, forever wondering what might have been. With a snap of his fingers, Azrael vanished. The studio erupted into chaos. As security guards rushed the stage and producers shouted conflicting orders, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her mind grappling with the impossible choice before her. In just 24 hours, she would have to decide. Embrace a power that could save her family but isolate her from the world, or return to a life of struggle and uncertainty. As the reality of her situation sank in, Sarah realized that her appearance on Lucky Break was just the beginning of a journey that would test her morals, her resilience, and the very fabric of her world. Sarah's hands trembled as she fumbled with her apartment keys, the events of the night replaying in her mind like a fevered dream. The dated wallpaper of her small studio apartment seemed to close in around her as she stumbled inside, collapsing onto her worn sofa. This can't be real, she muttered, running her fingers through her hair. But the business card Azrael had pressed into her palm before vanishing felt all too solid. Its obsidian surface seemed to absorb the dim light of her apartment, the embossed golden text catching her eye. Israel, purveyor of extraordinary opportunities. Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls from the Lucky Break producers, text messages from friends who'd watched the show, and a worried voicemail from her mother all demanded her attention. But how could she possibly explain what had happened? As the reality of her situation sank in, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. With the power to turn anything to gold, she could pay off her mother's medical bills in an instant. She could save her struggling business, donate to charities, help her entire town. But at what cost? A soft meow interrupted her thoughts. Mr. Whiskers, her faithful tabby, rubbed against her leg, seeking attention. Sarah reached down instinctively, then jerked her hand back with a gasp. What if Azrael wasn't bluffing? What if a single touch would turn her beloved pet into a lifeless statue? Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she realized the full implications of the curse. No more hugs from her mother. No more handshakes with customers. No more feeling the texture of paint on canvas, her one true passion. "Oh God," she choked out, curling into herself on the sofa. "What am I going to do?" As dawn broke, Sarah had made no progress in her decision. Exhausted and emotionally drained, she dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with golden statues and Azrael's burning eyes. A sharp knock at her door jolted her awake. Sarah stumbled to answer it, careful not to touch anything directly. She opened the door to find Chuck Walters, the Lucky Break host, his usual suave demeanor replaced by a look of frantic desperation. "Sarah, thank God you're here," he said, pushing past her into the apartment. "We need to talk." Sarah backed away, holding her hands up. "Don't come any closer. I don't know if it's already started." Chuck's eyes widened in understanding. "So it's true. It wasn't just some elaborate hoax or hallucination. That thing was real." Sarah nodded mutely. Chuck ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, musing it for probably the first time in years. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The network is in chaos. Half the audience swears they saw a demon on national television. The other half thinks it was all special effects gone wrong. Our sponsors are pulling out left and right." "I'm sorry," Sarah said weakly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Chuck's expression softened slightly. "Of course you didn't. None of us could have predicted this." He sighed heavily. "Look, Sarah, I came here to make you an offer. The network is willing to pay you handsomely to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Say it was all a publicity stunt gone wrong. We'll take care of everything else." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You want me to lie? To pretend none of this is real? It's the only way to salvage this mess," Chuck insisted. "Think about it. Even if you take this curse, how long before the government comes knocking? How long before every criminal in the country is after you? This way, you get the money you needed, and you get to keep your normal life." The offer was tempting, so tempting. A way out of this impossible situation. A chance to help her family without the burden of this terrifying power. But as Sarah looked into Chuck's pleading eyes, she saw something that made her pause. Fear, yes, but also a glimmer of greed. How much was the network really offering him to make this go away? I need time to think," Sarah said finally. "I have until tonight to make my decision." Chuck nodded, relief washing over his features. Of course. Just call me when you've decided, okay?" And Sarah, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful. Whatever that thing was, whatever power it's offered you, it's not worth it. Nothing is." As Chuck left, closing the door behind him, Sarah sank to the floor. The weight of her choice pressed down on her like a physical thing. Accept a curse that would isolate her from everyone she loved, but give her the power to help them beyond her wildest dreams? Or take the easy way out, bury the truth, and wonder for the rest of her life what might have been? With trembling fingers, Sarah reached for her phone. She had calls to make, hard conversations ahead. And as the hours ticked down to her moment of decision, she knew that whatever choice she made, her life would never be the same again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah stood at the crossroads of her destiny. Her apartment, once a haven, now felt like a prison. Every object seemed to mock her with its potential for transformation. She had spent the day in agonizing deliberation, her phone buzzing incessantly with calls from the show's producers, her mother, and even local news stations seeking comment on the bizarre events of the previous night. But Sarah had spoken to only one person, her mother. The conversation had been difficult, filled with long pauses and choked sobs. How do you tell your only living parent that you might never be able to hug them again? In the end, her mother's words echoed in her mind. Sarah, honey, you've always had a good heart. Trust it now. As the clock struck 8 p.m., a cold wind swept through the apartment, extinguishing the candles Sarah had lit. The temperature dropped, and she could see her breath misting in the air. Then, with a sound like thunder, Azrael appeared in her living room. Well, Sarah Thompson, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Have you made your decision? Sarah straightened her spine, meeting Azrael's fiery gaze. I have questions first. A smile played at the corners of Azrael's mouth. Naturally, ask away. Why me? Sarah demanded. Out of all the people in the world, why offer this curse to me? Azrael's eyes glittered with amusement. Why does a butterfly choose one flower over another? Sometimes, Sarah, it's the randomness that makes the game interesting. But if you're looking for a deeper meaning, he paused, studying her intently. Let's just say that souls like yours, compassionate, yet untested, offer the most intriguing possibilities. Sarah swallowed hard. And what happens after the 30 days? The curse ends, Azrael said simply. Whatever you've turned to gold remains so, but you'll no longer possess the power. You'll be free to touch the world again, whatever's left of it. Sarah's mind raced. 30 days. It seemed both an eternity and no time at all. Can I refuse the curse after accepting it? Azrael's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. Now that's an interesting question. Yes, you can renounce the curse at any time. But be warned, there's always a price for breaking such contracts. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. In her mind, she saw her mother's face, heard the desperation in Chuck's voice, felt the weight of her struggling business. But she also saw golden statues where loved ones used to be, a world drained of color and life. I've made my decision, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Azrael leaned forward, his eyes burning with anticipation. And I accept the curse. The words had barely left her lips when a searing pain shot through her body. Sarah gasped, falling to her knees as liquid fire seemed to course through her veins. The room spun around her, reality blurring at the edges. When the pain subsided, Sarah found herself alone in her apartment once more. Shakily, she got to her feet, looking down at her hands. They seemed normal enough, but she could feel a strange energy thrumming beneath her skin. Hesitantly, she reached out towards a small potted plant on her windowsill. The moment her fingertip brushed against a leaf, there was a flash of light. Where the vibrant green plant had stood moments before, there was now a perfect golden replica, gleaming in the moonlight. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding. It was real. All of it was real. As the magnitude of her decision washed over her, Sarah's phone began to ring. The caller ID showed it was Chuck Walters, probably calling to check on her decision about the network's offer. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for the phone, then stopped short. One touch and the device would be nothing more than a golden paperweight. How was she supposed to navigate the world like this? As she stood there, paralyzed by indecision, Sarah realized that accepting the curse was only the beginning. Now, she had 30 days to figure out how to use this terrible power for good, or watch as everything she touched turned to cold, lifeless gold. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, unaware of the transformation that had taken place in this small apartment. Sarah Thompson, once an ordinary woman struggling to make ends meet, now held the power to change the world in her hands. But as she looked out at the twinkling lights of Los Angeles, one question burned in her mind. At what cost? The first rays of sunlight crept through Sarah's curtains, finding her curled up on the floor, surrounded by a sea of golden objects. Her eyes were red-rimmed from a sleepless night filled with panic and experimentation. The gilded remains of her possessions told the story. A golden remote control, its buttons frozen in eternal stillness. Her favorite coffee mug, now a metallic chalice. Even her paintbrushes, once tools of creativity, now nothing more than expensive paperweights. Sarah's stomach growled, a harsh reminder of her new reality. She couldn't prepare food without turning it to inedible gold. Even turning on the faucet was impossible without transforming the handle. As the gravity of her situation sank in, Sarah felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over her. A soft meow drew her attention. Mr. Whiskers sat at the edge of the room, eyeing her warily. The cat's instincts seemed to sense the change in his owner, keeping him at a safe distance. "Oh, Whiskers," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. "What have I done?" The ringing of her doorbell jolted her out of her despair. Panic seized her as she realized she couldn't open the door without turning the knob to gold. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice shaking. "Sarah? It's Chuck. Chuck Walters. We need to talk." Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't let him in, couldn't risk him seeing the golden wasteland of her apartment. But she also couldn't ignore the outside world forever. "Chuck, I can't open the door. It's complicated." There was a pause, then Chuck's voice came again, lower this time. "It's about the curse, isn't it? You accepted it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "How did you know?" "Let's just say I've done some digging since last night," Chuck replied. "Sarah, please, we need to figure this out. The network is in chaos, and, well, I'm worried about you." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes at the unexpected kindness in his voice. "I don't know what to do, Chuck. I can't touch anything without turning it to gold. I can't eat. I can't drink. I don't know how long I can survive like this." Another pause. "Okay, listen carefully. I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me. Can you get to your window?" Sarah carefully made her way across the room, mindful not to brush against anything. She peered out to see Chuck standing on the sidewalk, looking up at her. He was holding a large duffel bag. "I'm going to toss this up to you," he called out. "It's got gloves, protective gear, some food and water containers that should be safe to use. Can you open the window?" Using a nearby book as a barrier, Sarah managed to unlock and raise the window without touching it directly. Chuck's aim was true, and the duffel bag landed safely inside. As Sarah donned the protective gear, thick rubber gloves, a full-body suit that looked like it belonged in a hazmat scene, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since accepting the curse. Fully covered, she was finally able to open the door for Chuck. He stepped inside, his eyes widening as he took in the golden tableau of her apartment. "My God," he whispered. "It's really true." Sarah nodded, her voice muffled behind the protective mask. "What am I going to do, Chuck? I can't live like this for 30 days. And even if I could, the temptation to use this power is terrifying." Chuck's expression hardened with determination. "We'll figure this out, Sarah. Promise. But first, we need to get you out of here. It's not safe. If word gets out about your condition, every criminal and government agency in the country will be after you." "But where can I go?" Sarah asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Chuck hesitated for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "I know a place, private estate outside the city, isolated, secure. It belongs to an associate of mine who owes me a favor. We can set you up there while we figure out our next move." As they hurriedly packed a bag with the essentials, all carefully wrapped to prevent accidental transformation, Sarah's mind whirled with questions. Why was Chuck helping her? What did he mean by associate? And most pressingly, how was she going to navigate the next 29 days without causing irreparable harm to herself or others? As they slipped out of the apartment building under the cover of early morning shadows, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in a store window. Encased in protective gear, unrecognizable, she looked like an alien in her own world. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to change her life, She had become untouchable, isolated from the very people she had hoped to help. The city streets, normally bustling with life, seemed eerily quiet as Chuck ushered her into a waiting car with tinted windows. As they pulled away from her old life, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was embarking on a journey far more perilous and unpredictable than anything she could have imagined. In the driver's seat, Chuck's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw set in grim determination. "Hang in there, Sarah," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. This is just the beginning. As the city receded behind them, Sarah wondered, the beginning of what? Exactly? Salvation or damnation? Only time would tell. The car wound its way through the twisting roads of the Santa Monica Mountains, leaving the sprawl of Los Angeles far behind. Sarah watched the landscape change through the tinted windows, her gloved hands fidgeting in her lap. The protective suit was stifling in the California heat, but she didn't dare remove it. After what seemed like hours, Chuck turned onto a private road. A massive iron gate loomed before them, surrounded by high walls topped with security cameras. Chuck punched a code into a keypad, and the gate swung open silently. "Welcome to the Haven," Chuck said, his voice tight with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. "This place belongs to Maxwell Goldhirsch. Let's call him an eccentric billionaire with a penchant for privacy." As they pulled up to a sprawling modernist mansion, Sarah's eyes widened behind her protective mask. The house was a marvel of glass and steel, perched on the edge of a cliff with a breathtaking view of the Pacific Ocean. "Mr. Goldhirsch is currently abroad," Chuck explained as he helped Sarah out of the car. "He's agreed to let you stay here, off the grid, while we figure out how to handle your situation." Sarah's head was spinning. "Chuck, I don't understand. Why are you doing all this for me? And how do you know people like Maxwell Goldhirsch?" Chuck's expression darkened. "Let's get you settled in first. There's a lot we need to discuss." The interior of the mansion was just as impressive as the exterior. Priceless art adorned the walls, and every surface gleamed with luxury. As Chuck led her to a spacious bedroom suite, Sarah couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this opulent world. "This room has been prepared for your unique needs," Chuck said, gesturing to various modifications. "The surfaces are coated with a special non-reactive polymer. You should be able to touch most things without turning them to gold. There's a supply of protective gear in the closet, and the bathroom has been similarly treated." Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. "Chuck, please. I need answers. What's really going on here?" Chuck sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "The truth is, Sarah, you're not the first person to be offered this curse, and I'm not just a game show host." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I work for an organization that monitors and manages supernatural occurrences," Chuck explained, his voice low. "We call ourselves the Gilded Hand. For centuries, we've been tracking cases like yours, helping people navigate these gifts while protecting the world from their potential consequences." Sarah's mind reeled. "So, Lucky Break was a front," Chuck finished. "A way to identify potential candidates for these powers. We never expected Azrael to make such a public appearance. It's thrown everything into chaos." As the implications sank in, Sarah felt a surge of anger. "You knew this could happen? You put me in this position." Chuck held up his hands placatingly. "We don't control who gets chosen, Sarah. We only try to manage the aftermath. Believe me, if I could have prevented this, I would have." Before Sarah could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Chuck's hand moved to his waist, where Sarah now noticed the outline of a concealed weapon. "Mr. Walters," a crisp voice called out. "Your presence is required in the study." Immediately, Chuck's face paled. "Stay here," he whispered to Sarah. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." As Chuck slipped out of the room, Sarah was left alone with her turbulent thoughts. The curse was bad enough, but now she found herself embroiled in a world of secret organizations and supernatural powers. She moved to the window, gazing out at the ocean below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds. It should have been beautiful, but all Sarah could think about was how those colors now represented a terrible power she never asked for. In the distance, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the setting sun. For a moment, she thought it was Chuck, but then the figure turned, and Sarah gasped. Even from this distance, she could see the glowing, ember-like eyes. Azrael had found her. As darkness fell over the haven, Sarah realized that her sanctuary might just be another gilded cage, and the game she had unwittingly entered was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Sarah's heart raced as she watched Azrael's silhouette dissolve into the gathering darkness. She backed away from the window, her mind reeling. How had he found her? What did his presence mean? A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Sarah? It's Chuck. Can I come in?" She hesitated, remembering Chuck's warning about not opening the door for anyone. "How do I know it's really you?" There was a pause. Then Chuck's voice came again, softer this time. "The first thing you turned to gold was a potted plant. You told me that this morning in the car." Relief flooded through Sarah as she carefully opened the door. Chuck slipped inside, his face drawn and tense. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The organization is divided on how to handle your situation. Some want to help you, others." He trailed off, his expression grim. "Others what, Chuck?" Sarah pressed, fear clawing at her throat. Chuck met her eyes, his gaze steady. "Others think you're too great a risk. They want to contain you, study you, maybe indefinitely." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Contain me? Like a lab rat?" "I won't let that happen," Chuck said firmly. "But we need to be careful. There are ears everywhere in this house." As if to emphasize his point, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. Chuck motioned for Sarah to be quiet as he moved to the door, listening intently. After a moment, he relaxed slightly. "We can't stay here long," he whispered. "I have a plan, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "I saw Azrael," she blurted out. "Outside, just before you came in." Chuck's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Those eyes, I'd recognize them anywhere." Chuck ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. "This complicates things. Azrael's presence means the stakes are even higher than we thought." A sudden burst of shouting from downstairs made them both freeze. The sound of running feet and slamming doors echoed through the mansion. "We're out of time," Chuck hissed. He grabbed a backpack from the closet, quickly stuffing it with supplies. "We need to leave. Now." Sarah's head spun as Chuck led her to a hidden panel in the wall. It slid open to reveal a narrow passageway. "This leads to an underground garage," Chuck explained as they hurried through. "There's a car waiting. We'll head north to a safe house I know." As they emerged into a dimly lit garage, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in a car window. She barely recognized herself, still encased in the protective suit, following a man she barely knew into an uncertain future. They were just about to reach the car when a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the immaculate suit and burning eyes. "Going somewhere?" Azrael's smooth voice sent chills down Sarah's spine. Chuck moved protectively in front of Sarah, his hand moving to his concealed weapon. "This doesn't concern you, Azrael. Our deal was for 30 days. You can't interfere." Azrael's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, but I'm not interfering, Chuck. I'm simply observing. It's not my fault if others have taken an interest in our little experiment." As if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from the passage they had just exited. Voices called out, growing closer. "Choose wisely, Sarah Thompson," Azrael said, his eyes boring into hers. "The path you take from here will determine far more than just your fate." With a gesture, Azrael vanished in a swirl of shadows, leaving Chuck and Sarah alone in the garage once more. But the voices were getting closer, and time was running out. "Sarah," Chuck said urgently, "we have to go. Now." As they sped away from the haven, tires squealing on asphalt, Sarah's mind whirled with unanswered questions. Who could she really trust? What did Azrael mean about others taking an interest? And most pressingly, how was she supposed to navigate this dangerous new world when everything she touched turned to gold? The lights of Los Angeles receded in the rearview mirror as they headed north into the unknown. Sarah clutched her gloved hands together, acutely aware of the power thrumming beneath her skin. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The car sped through the night, headlights cutting through the darkness as Chuck navigated the winding coastal highway. Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, her mind a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. The events of the past few days felt like a surreal nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Where exactly are we going? Sarah finally broke the tense silence. Chuck's eyes remained fixed on the road. I have a contact in San Francisco, an old friend who might be able to help us understand your condition better. Sarah's brow furrowed behind her protective mask. Understand it? Chuck, I turn things to gold when I touch them. What's there to understand? Chuck sighed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. There's always more to these gifts than meets the eye, Sarah. The organization has been studying them for centuries, but we've barely scratched the surface of their true nature or origin. As they drove, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her mother, her small apartment, her struggling art supply store. It all seemed so distant now, like a life that belonged to someone else. A pang of longing hit her as she realized she might never be able to return to that simple existence. Suddenly, Chuck tensed, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. We've got company, he muttered. Sarah turned to look behind them, her heart racing. Two black SUVs had appeared on the road, closing in fast. Hold on, Chuck warned as he pressed down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, engine roaring as they sped up. But the SUVs kept pace, drawing closer with each passing moment. Sarah's breath came in short gasps as panic threatened to overwhelm her. Who are they? Could be the organization, Chuck said grimly. Or worse. Before Sarah could ask what could be worse, a deafening crack split the air. The rear window shattered, showering them with glass. Sarah screamed, instinctively covering her head. Get down, Chuck yelled, swerving the car wildly to avoid another shot. The chase continued at breakneck speed, the coastal highway becoming increasingly treacherous. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears as Chuck navigated hairpin turns, the pursuing vehicles never far behind. In a desperate move, Chuck suddenly veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt track leading into dense forest. Branches whipped against the windshield as they plunged into the darkness. We can't outrun them forever, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Chuck's face was a mask of determination. We don't have to. We just need to reach the safe house. It's not far now. As they emerged from the forest into a moonlit clearing, Sarah gasped. Before them stood an old lighthouse, its beams sweeping across the turbulent ocean below. That's your safe house? Sarah asked incredulously. Chuck nodded, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Quickly now. We don't have much time. As they raced towards the lighthouse, the sound of engines growing louder behind them, Sarah's foot caught on a root. She stumbled, her hand instinctively reaching out to catch herself on a nearby tree. There was a blinding flash, and where her hand had touched, the tree began to transform. Golden bark spread like wildfire, leaves shimmering as they turned to metal. Within seconds, the entire tree stood as a gleaming golden statue, catching the moonlight in a dazzling display. Sarah stared in horror at what she had done. Even through the protective gloves, her power had manifested. Sarah, come on. Chuck's urgent voice snapped her back to reality. As they reached the lighthouse door, fumbling with keys, Sarah glanced back. The pursuing vehicles had just entered the clearing, their headlights illuminating the golden tree. Even from a distance, she could see the shock and awe on the faces of their pursuers. Chuck finally got the door open, ushering Sarah inside. As he slammed it shut behind them, engaging multiple locks, Sarah leaned against the wall, breathless and terrified. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chuck's expression was grim but determined. "Now we find a way to control your power, before it controls you." Outside, car doors slammed, and voices called out. Their pursuers were closing in. As Chuck led her up the winding lighthouse stairs, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were trapped. Between the curse that turned everything she touched to gold and the mysterious forces pursuing them, she felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Little did she know, the true test of her power and her humanity was yet to come. The narrow, spiraling staircase of the lighthouse seemed endless as Sarah and Chuck raced upwards, the sound of their pursuers echoing from below. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, the protective suit feeling more suffocating with each step. "Almost there," Chuck panted, urging her on. They burst through a door onto the lighthouse's observation deck. The cool night air, a stark contrast to the stuffy interior. The massive lamp rotated slowly, its beams sweeping across the dark waters below. Chuck rushed to a control panel, his fingers flying over the keys. "This isn't just a lighthouse," he explained hurriedly. "It's a beacon for those like us, a signal to the network." Sarah's mind reeled. Network? What network? Before Chuck could answer, the door below crashed open. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. "No time to explain," Chuck said grimly. He pulled a small device from his pocket, pressing it into Sarah's gloved hand. "If anything happens to me, use this. It'll guide you to safety." Sarah's eyes widened in fear. "Chuck, what are you?" The door burst open, and 3 figures in dark tactical gear spilled onto the deck, weapons raised. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the insignia on their uniforms. The same symbol she'd seen at the Haven. "Hand over the girl, Walters." One of them growled. "This doesn't have to get messy." Chuck positioned himself in front of Sarah, his stance protective. "You know I can't do that, Jenkins. She's not a lab rat for you to experiment on." The man called Jenkins sneered. "Always the idealist, eh, Chuck? The power she possesses is too valuable to be left unchecked. Stand aside." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jenkins raised his weapon, Chuck lunged forward, and Sarah, acting on pure instinct, reached out to push Chuck aside. The moment her gloved hand made contact with Chuck's arm, there was a blinding flash. Sarah screamed, stumbling backwards as she felt the now familiar surge of power course through her. When her vision cleared, she gasped in horror. Where Chuck had stood moments before was now a perfect golden statue, his face frozen in an expression of determination and fear. "No!" Sarah cried out, falling to her knees beside the gilded figure of her protector. The armed men stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered. Jenkins was the first to recover, a look of awe and greed spreading across his face. "My God!" he breathed. "The power. It's even more potent than we thought." As Jenkins took a step towards her, Sarah felt something snap inside her. Grief turned to rage, and with it came a startling realization. She could feel the power within her. No longer an uncontrollable force, but a tool at her command. Sarah rose slowly, her eyes blazing with a newfound determination. "Stay back," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. Jenkins laughed, but there was a note of uncertainty in it. "Or what? You'll turn us all to gold? That would only prove our point about how dangerous you are." Sarah's mind raced. Chuck had said the lighthouse was a beacon, a signal to some kind of network. Maybe, in one fluid motion, Sarah ripped off her protective gloves. Before anyone could react, she placed her bare hands on the control panel Chuck had been working on earlier. The effect was instantaneous. Golden tendrils spread across the machinery, transforming circuits and wires into precious metal. But instead of shutting down, the lighthouse beam intensified, pulsing with a brilliant golden light that lit up the night sky like a second sun. The armed men staggered back, shielding their eyes. Sarah stood at the center of the golden maelstrom, her hair whipping around her face as the power surged through her and into the lighthouse. "What have you done?" Jenkins shouted over the growing whine of the machinery. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes glowing with the same golden light as the beacon. "I'm sending a message," she said, her voice resonating with newfound strength. "And trust me, you don't want to be here when it's answered." As if on cue, a low rumble filled the air. The men looked around in panic as the ground began to shake. In the distance, Sarah could see lights approaching not from the land, but from the sea and sky. Jenkins and his men scrambled for the exit, but Sarah barely noticed their retreat. Her attention was fixed on the golden statue of Chuck. Tentatively, she reached out a bare hand and touched his metallic cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll find a way to fix this. I promise." As the mysterious lights drew closer and the lighthouse pulsed with golden energy, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had unlocked something within herself, a well of power and potential she never knew existed. For the first time since receiving the curse, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets were yet to be uncovered, she would face them head-on. Not just for her own sake, but for Chuck, for her mother, and for all those who might be affected by this strange and wonderful power. The golden beacon blazed on, a signal to friend and foe alike. Sarah Thompson was no longer running. She was ready to stand and fight. As the night sky blazed with the golden light of the heart pounding with a mixture of fear and newfound determination, the rumbling grew louder, and she gasped as she saw what was approach a transformed lighthouse. Sarah stood her ground, hurrying. From the sea, a sleek submarine breached the surface, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly iridescence. From the sky, a massive airship descended, its design like nothing Sarah had ever seen before. And from the land, a convoy of vehicles that seemed to phase in and out of reality sped towards the lighthouse. As these fantastic vehicles converged, figures began to emerge. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in their appearances, each one unique, some clearly not entirely human. There was a woman with skin that rippled like water, a man whose body seemed to be composed of living shadow, and others whose forms defied easy description. At the forefront of this group, a tall, elegant woman with silver hair that moved as if blown by an unseen wind approached Sarah. Her eyes, a swirling mix of colors, locked onto Sarah's with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. "Sarah Thompson," the woman said, her voice carrying an echo of countless whispers. "I am Alara, keeper of the Gilded Network. We've been expecting you." Sarah swallowed hard, finding her voice. You have." Alara nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "The emergence of a new Gilded One always sends ripples through our network. But you, my dear, have caused quite the tsunami." Sarah's gaze drifted to the golden statue of Chuck. "Can you help him? Can you reverse what I've done?" Alara's expression softened. "Ah, Charles Walters, a brave soul, and one of our most dedicated agents. His sacrifice will not be in vain." She placed a hand on the statue, and to Sarah's amazement, a soft glow emanated from her touch. Slowly, the gold began to recede, color seeping back into Chuck's form. With a gasp, Chuck stumbled forward, blinking in confusion. "Sarah? What happened?" Before Sarah could respond, Alara raised her hand, silencing them both. "There will be time for explanations later. For now, we must move. The Gilded Hand is not the only organization aware of your awakening, Sarah. There are darker forces at play." As if to emphasize her point, a distant explosion rocked the area. Sarah turned to see plumes of smoke rising from the direction where Jenkins and his men had fled. "Come," Alara said urgently. "We must get you to safety. Both of you." As they rushed towards the waiting vehicles, Sarah's mind whirled with questions. "Who are you people? What's happening to me?" Alara guided them into a sleek vehicle that seemed to hover inches above the ground. "We are the Gilded Network, a collective of individuals blessed or cursed, depending on your perspective, with extraordinary abilities. For centuries, we've worked in the shadows, protecting the world from threats beyond mortal understanding." The vehicle surged forward, joining the convoy as they sped away from the lighthouse. Through the window, Sarah watched as the golden beacon faded into the distance, a part of her old life disappearing with it. Chuck, still looking dazed, placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything before. There's so much you need to know." Alara nodded solemnly. "Indeed, Sarah, your ability to turn objects to gold is just the surface of your potential. You are a transmuter, one of the rarest and most powerful of our kind. With proper training, you could reshape reality itself." Sarah's head spun with the implications. "But why me? Why now?" "That," Alara said, her multicolored eyes flickering with concern, "is the question that has us all worried. The emergence of a transmuter often heralds great change or great danger. There are forces out there that would seek to use your power for their own ends." As the convoy sped through the night, occasionally seeming to phase through solid objects or leap impossible distances, Sarah tried to process everything she was hearing. Her whole world had been turned upside down in a matter of days, and now she was being told that she was part of some secret supernatural network? "What about my mom?" Sarah asked suddenly, a pang of guilt hitting her. "I can't just disappear. She'll be worried sick." Chuck and Alara exchanged a look. "We'll ensure your mother's safety," Chuck assured her. "But Sarah, you have to understand. Your life as you knew it is over, at least for now. The path ahead won't be easy, but I promise you, you're not alone." As the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, Sarah gazed out at the rapidly changing landscape. She thought about everything she was leaving behind: her struggling art store, her small apartment, the simple life she had known. But she also felt a stirring of excitement, a sense of purpose she had never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dark forces were gathering, Sarah knew one thing for certain: she was done running. It was time to embrace her power, to learn to control it, and to find out just what it meant to be a transmuter in this hidden world of wonders and dangers. As the convoy phased through a shimmering portal that seemed to appear out of thin air, Sarah took a deep breath. Her journey as a Gilded One had only just begun. The shimmering portal gave way to a breathtaking sight that made Sarah gasp in awe. Before them stretched a vast, hidden valley, nestled between towering mountains that seemed to touch the clouds. At the center of this secret paradise stood a magnificent citadel, its spires and domes gleaming with a fusion of gold and crystal. "Welcome," Alara said, a hint of pride in her voice, "to Aurum Lux, the heart of the Gilded Network." As their vehicle descended towards the citadel, Sarah pressed her face against the window, drinking in every detail. The valley was a harmonious blend of nature and advanced technology. Lush forests and crystalline lakes coexisted with buildings that defied conventional architecture, some seeming to float in midair. "It's incredible," Sarah breathed. Chuck nodded, a small smile on his face. "I felt the same way the first time I saw it. Even after years of working with the network, it still takes my breath away." Their vehicle touched down on a landing pad near the Citadel's main entrance. As they disembarked, Sarah noticed other arrivals, beings of all shapes and sizes, some clearly not human, all exuding an aura of barely contained power. Alara led them through grand halls adorned with murals depicting what seemed to be the history of the Gilded Network. Sarah caught glimpses of epic battles, great discoveries, and figures wielding powers beyond imagination. "You have questions," Alara said, sensing Sarah's overwhelmed state, "and you shall have answers. But first, we must ensure your safety and begin your training." They arrived at a circular chamber dominated by a massive golden tree, its leaves shimmering with an inner light. Around the tree stood a council of diverse beings, all turning to regard Sarah with intense curiosity. "Esteemed members of the Gilded Council," Alara announced, her voice ringing with authority, "I present to you Sarah Thompson, the newly awakened transmuter." A murmur rippled through the assembly. An elderly man with eyes that sparkled like galaxies stepped forward. "A transmuter? After all these years, the prophecy speaks true." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Prophecy? What prophecy?" The elderly man smiled kindly. "All in due time, young one. I am Aldrin, Keeper of Lore. Your arrival has been foretold, though the details of your role remain unclear. Before Sarah could press for more information, a commotion at the chamber's entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of gilded ones burst in, supporting an injured companion between them. "We were ambushed," one of them called out. "The Obsidian Order. They knew we were coming." Alara's expression darkened. "So they make their move at last. Sarah, I'm afraid your training will have to begin sooner than anticipated. The forces that seek to exploit your power are closing in." As healers rushed to tend to the injured, Alara turned to Chuck. "Charles, I need you to brief the council on everything that transpired at the lighthouse. Sarah, come with me. It's time you learned to harness your true potential." Sarah cast a worried glance at Chuck, who gave her an encouraging nod. As she followed Alara out of the chamber and deeper into the citadel, Sarah's mind raced. Prophecies, secret orders, ambushes. It was all so far removed from her life just days ago. They arrived at a smaller, circular room lined with mirrors. At its center stood a pedestal holding a single, ordinary-looking pebble. "Your power, Sarah," Alara explained, "goes far beyond simply turning things to gold. You have the ability to transmute matter itself, to reshape reality according to your will. But with great power comes great responsibility and great danger." Sarah approached the pedestal cautiously. "What do you want me to do?" Alara's multicolored eyes bore into Sarah's. "I want you to change the very nature of that pebble. Not just its composition, but its fundamental properties. Can you feel the energy within you, the connection to the world around you?" Sarah closed her eyes, focusing inward. To her surprise, she could sense a wellspring of power thrumming just beneath her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She reached out with her mind, extending that energy towards the pebble. First, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the pebble began to change. It shifted from gray to blue, then to red, then to a color Sarah had never seen before. Its shape morphed, becoming fluid, then crystalline, then something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Sarah could comprehend. "Excellent," Alara breathed. "You're a natural, Sarah, but this is just the beginning. In the days to come, you'll learn to transmute on a scale you never thought possible. And you'll need every bit of that power for the challenges that lie ahead." As Sarah marveled at what she had done, a distant explosion rocked the citadel. Alarms began to blare, and Alara's expression turned grim. "It seems," she said, her voice tight, "that our enemies are more bold than we anticipated. Come, Sarah, it's time to put your new skills to the test. The battle for the future of the Gilded Network, and perhaps the world itself, begins now." With her heart pounding and her newfound power surging within her, Sarah followed Alara towards the sound of chaos. Whatever lay ahead, she was determined to face it head-on. The girl who had entered a simple game show was gone. In her place stood a transmuter, ready to reshape destiny itself. The citadel shook with another explosion as Sarah and Alara raced through its winding corridors. The air crackled with energy, and Sarah could sense the surge of power as other gilded ones throughout Aurum Lux prepared for battle. They burst onto a grand balcony overlooking the valley. Sarah's eyes widened in horror at the scene before her. A dark, swirling vortex had opened in the sky, disgorging wave after wave of shadowy figures. At their head was a man Sarah recognized with a jolt, Azrael, his eyes burning with malevolent glee. "The Obsidian Order," Alara growled, her silver hair whipping in the wind. "They seek to overthrow the balance, to plunge the world into chaos and remake it in their image." Sarah watched as Gilded Ones took to the air, engaging the invaders in spectacular displays of power. Bolts of energy crisscrossed the sky, elements clashed, and reality itself seemed to warp and twist. "What can I do?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Alara turned to her, eyes blazing. "You, Sarah, are our wild card. The Obsidian Order doesn't know the full extent of your abilities, and neither do you. Trust your instincts, and remember, you're not just transforming matter, you're reshaping possibility itself." With that, Alara leapt from the balcony, her form shimmering as she joined the fray. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the power surge within her. She extended her hands, focusing on the very air around her. To her amazement, the air began to solidify, forming a golden bridge that extended from the balcony towards the heart of the battle. Sarah stepped onto it, her confidence growing with each step. As shadowy figures noticed her and swooped in to attack, she reached out with her power. One by one, Sarah transmuted her attackers. But instead of turning them to simple gold, she reshaped them into blazing comets of light that streaked back through the portal, disrupting the Obsidian Order's forces from within. Azrael's voice boomed across the battlefield. The transmuter, capture her at all costs. A surge of dark energy coalesced, forming into a massive, draconic shape that lunged towards Sarah. Time seemed to slow as she faced the oncoming threat. In that moment, Sarah understood what Alara had meant about reshaping possibility. She reached out, not just with her hands, but with her mind, her will, her very essence. The draconic form shuddered, its shadowy mass beginning to fracture. Sarah poured her power into it, not destroying, but transforming. With a blinding flash, the dark dragon reformed into a creature of pure golden light. It turned, majestic and awe-inspiring, to face the forces of the Obsidian Order. A roar of triumph echoed across the valley as the tide of battle began to turn. Azrael's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Transmuter," he snarled, before vanishing into the swirling vortex. The remaining shadow figures retreated, the portal collapsing behind them. As the golden light of dawn broke over Aurum Lux, Sarah sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. Chuck and Alara rushed to her side, their faces a mix of concern and pride. "You did it, Sarah," Chuck said, helping her to her feet. "You turned the tide." Alara nodded solemnly. "Indeed, but this was merely the first battle in a greater war. The Obsidian Order will return, and we must be ready." As the citizens of Aurum Lux began to regroup and rebuild, Sarah looked out over the valley. The events of the past few days felt like a lifetime. She had discovered a hidden world, unlocked incredible powers within herself, and faced dangers beyond imagination. But as she stood there, surrounded by her new allies, Sarah realized that her journey was far from over. The true test of her abilities and her character was yet to come. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Whatever comes next, I'll face it. We'll face it together." The golden sun rose higher, casting its light over Aurum Lux. A new day had dawned, and with it, the next chapter in Sarah's extraordinary adventure was about to unfold. In the days following the Obsidian Order's attack, Aurum Lux hummed with activity. The Gilded Network was on high alert, fortifying defenses and preparing for the next inevitable confrontation. Amidst this flurry of preparation, Sarah found herself delving deeper into her training, pushing the boundaries of her newfound abilities. One crisp morning, as Sarah practiced transmuting increasingly complex objects under Alara's watchful eye, Aldrin, the Keeper of Lore, approached them with an air of urgency. "It's time," he said, his starry eyes twinkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "The Council has agreed. Sarah must know the full extent of the prophecy." Alara's expression tightened, but she nodded in agreement. "Very well, Sarah, come with us. There's something you need to see." They led her deep into the heart of the Citadel, down winding staircases that seemed to defy normal geometry. Finally, they arrived at a circular chamber dominated by a shimmering pool of what looked like liquid starlight. "This is the Well of Visions," Aldrin explained. "For millennia, it has shown us glimpses of possible futures, guiding the Gilded Network through times of crisis." Sarah approached the edge of the pool, mesmerized by its swirling depths. "And it showed you something about me?" Aldrin nodded gravely. "Not just about you, my dear. About the role you're destined to play in the coming conflict." With a wave of his hand, the surface of the pool began to ripple. Images formed in its depths, blurry at first but gradually sharpening into focus. Sarah saw herself, but different, older, more confident, her eyes glowing with golden light. This future Sarah stood at the center of a great maelstrom of energy, facing off against a darkened figure that could only be Azrael. The fate of the world seemed to hang in the balance between them. The prophecy speaks of a transmuter who will rise in the time of greatest need. Aldrin intoned, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. One with the power to reshape not just matter, but the very fabric of reality itself. This transmuter will face a choice to preserve the balance of the world, or to remake it anew. The images in the pool shifted, showing two possible outcomes. In one, Sarah saw a world of harmony and wonder, where the powers of the Gilded Network were used openly for the benefit of all. In the other, she saw a world transmuted entirely into gold, beautiful, but lifeless and cold. The choice will be yours, Sarah, Alara said softly, but the weight of that choice is greater than you can imagine. As the visions faded, Sarah stumbled back, her mind reeling. But how can I possibly make a choice like that? I'm just me. I was running an art supply store a week ago. Aldrin placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Destiny rarely calls upon us at a moment of our choosing, Sarah. But know this, you are not alone. The Gilded Network stands with you, to guide and support you on this journey. Alara's multicolored eyes met Sarah's. The future is not set in stone. These visions show possibilities, not certainties. Your actions, your choices will shape the path ahead. As they left the well of visions, Sarah's mind buzzed with questions and doubts. The enormity of her potential destiny weighed heavily upon her. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the citadel. Chuck came running towards them, his face etched with concern. "We've got a problem," he panted. "We've detected multiple breaches in the veil between worlds. The Obsidian Order is making their move, and they're targeting sites all across the globe." Alara's expression hardened. "Then we must respond in kind. Sarah, are you ready to step onto the world stage? To use your powers not just in the safety of Aurum Lux, but in the world you once called home?" Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. The weight of prophecy and expectation was daunting, but she knew she couldn't shy away from this responsibility. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever it takes to stop the Obsidian Order and protect both worlds." As the Gilded Network mobilized for battle, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was she walking the path towards that harmonious future? Or was she taking the first steps towards a cold, golden apocalypse? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the true test of her powers and her character was about to begin. The command center of Aurum Lux buzzed with frantic activity as holographic displays showed multiple incursions across the globe. Gilded ones rushed to and fro, preparing for deployment. Alara stood at the center, issuing rapid-fire orders. Team Alpha to New York, Team Beta to Tokyo. We need to contain these breaches before the public becomes aware of our existence. Sarah watched in awe as portals opened, allowing teams to step through instantly to far-flung locations. Chuck appeared at her side, looking grim. "Sarah, we've got a situation in your hometown," he said, pulling up a holographic display of Millbrook, Alabama. A swirling vortex of darkness was growing in the town square, shadowy figures emerging from it. Sarah's heart clenched. "My mom is safe," Chuck assured her. "We've already extracted her. But the town, Sarah, I think this is a trap. They're trying to draw you out." Alara approached, her expression serious. "It's your choice, Sarah. We can send another team." "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "This is my home, my responsibility. I'll go." Alara nodded, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Very well. Chuck will accompany you. Remember your training and be cautious. Azrael will stop at nothing to capture or corrupt you." Moments later, Sarah and Chuck stepped through a shimmering portal, emerging in the familiar streets of Millbrook. The sight that greeted them was surreal. The quaint town square she'd known all her life was now the epicenter of chaos. Shadowy creatures prowled the streets, citizens ran in panic, and at the center of it all stood Azrael, his burning eyes fixed on Sarah. "Ah, the prodigal transmuter returns," he called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Come to save your precious hometown?" Sarah stepped forward, golden energy crackling around her fists. "I've come to stop you, Azrael. This ends now." Azrael's laughter echoed unnaturally. "Oh, my dear, this is only the beginning. Shall we show the world what true power looks like?" With a gesture, he sent a wave of darkness surging towards Sarah. She reacted instinctively, transmuting the very air into a golden shield. The collision sent shockwaves through the town. As Chuck engaged the shadow creatures, Sarah faced off against Azrael. Their powers clashed in a dazzling display of light and darkness. Sarah transmuted the ground beneath Azrael's feet into quicksand, then into solid crystal. But he always managed to slip away, countering with blasts of void energy that Sarah barely dodged. The battle raged on, laying waste to the familiar streets of Millbrook. Sarah's heart ached as she saw her old art supply store crumble under the onslaught. But she couldn't falter. The fate of not just her town, but potentially the world, hung in the balance. As their conflict reached a fever pitch, Sarah realized the true danger. The veil between worlds was thinning, reality itself buckling under the strain of their clashing powers. In the sky above, rifts began to open, offering glimpses of other dimensions. "Yes," Azrael cried out in triumph. "Let the walls between worlds crumble. We shall reshape reality itself." Sarah's mind raced. This was the moment the prophecy had foretold, the choice that would determine the fate of everything. In a flash of insight, she understood what she had to do. Reaching deep within herself, Sarah tapped into the full extent of her powers. Golden light erupted from her body as she began to transmute not just matter, but the fabric of reality itself. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Chuck called out in alarm. "What I have to," she replied, her voice resonating with power. "Reshaping possibility." As Azrael lunged towards her, Sarah released a pulse of golden energy that engulfed the entire town. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in perfect stillness. Then, slowly, the rifts in the sky began to close. The shadow creatures dissolved. And Azrael stood frozen, a look of shock on his face as golden light coursed over his form. When the light faded, Millbrook stood pristine, restored to its former state. The citizens looked around in confusion, as if awakening from a dream. And where Azrael had stood was now a simple statue, not of gold, but of ordinary stone. Sarah collapsed to her knees, drained but triumphant. Chuck rushed to her side, his eyes wide with amazement. "What did you do?" he asked in awe. Sarah smiled weakly. "I transmuted the possibility of his victory into the certainty of his defeat. And I chose to preserve the balance, not to remake the world." As the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over Millbrook, Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. The Obsidian Order was still out there, and her powers would be needed again. But for now, in this moment, she had found the perfect balance between her old life and her new destiny, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the weeks following the Battle of Millbrook, the world teetered on the edge of a new era. Though the Gilded Network had managed to contain most of the breaches, whispers of the supernatural had begun to circulate. Blurry videos of Sarah's confrontation with Azrael went viral, sparking debates about the existence of magic and superhuman abilities. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, a reluctant symbol of a changing world. As she stood on the balcony of Aurum Lux, overlooking the hidden valley, she reflected on the whirlwind her life had become. Alara approached, joining her at the railing. "The council has made a decision," she said softly. "It's time for the Gilded Network to step out of the shadows. The world is ready." Sarah's eyes widened. "Are you sure? Won't that cause panic?" Alara smiled. "Perhaps at first, but your actions in Millbrook showed us something important. Humanity is capable of adapting, of accepting wonders beyond their previous understanding. And they'll need that adaptability for the challenges ahead." Chuck joined them, looking more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him. "The Obsidian Order is in disarray after Azrael's defeat, but they're not gone. We've detected remnants regrouping in hidden corners of the world. Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eye. Then we'll be ready for them. Together. As if on cue, a shimmering portal opened nearby. Sarah's mother stepped through, escorted by Aldrin. Her eyes were wide with wonder as she took in the breathtaking view of Aurum Lux. "Mom!" Sarah rushed to embrace her, no longer afraid of her touch turning others to gold. Her control over her powers had grown exponentially. "Oh, Sarah," her mother breathed, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you, and a little terrified if I'm being honest, but mostly proud." Sarah laughed, feeling truly at peace for the first time in weeks. "I have so much to tell you, Mom. About this place, about what I can do now, about the adventures ahead." As Sarah began to explain, more portals opened around them. The families of other Gilded Ones arrived, reuniting with their powered loved ones. It was a day of joy, of new beginnings, of bridges being built between the mundane and the magical. Later that evening, as the sun set over Aurum Lux, casting the valley in a warm, golden glow, the Gilded Council convened one last time before their public revelation. Sarah stood among them, no longer an outsider, but a key member of this extraordinary network. Alara addressed the assembly, her voice ringing with conviction. "Tomorrow we step into the light. We offer our gifts to the world, not to rule, but to guide, to protect, to inspire. The path ahead will not be easy, but together, we will forge a future brighter than any we could have imagined." As cheers erupted around her, Sarah felt a surge of excitement and purpose. She thought back to that fateful day on the Lucky Break stage, when she thought winning some money would solve all her problems. How small that seemed now, in the face of the destiny she had embraced. The world was changing, awakening to the magic that had always existed just beyond the veil. And Sarah Thompson, once a struggling artist from a small town, now stood at the forefront of that change. A transmuter, a protector, a beacon of hope for a new age. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Sarah made a silent vow. She would use her powers not for personal gain, but for the greater good. She would face whatever challenges arose, be they from the Obsidian Order or from the fears and doubts of a world confronting the unknown. And she would do it all with the strength of the Gilded Network behind her, and the love of her family and friends to guide her. The golden dawn of a new era was upon them, and Sarah Thompson was ready to shine. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.